Welcome, everyone. We've got a great guest here at Podcast Guest Profits. I was printed out his bio, and I was going to read it, but I'm like, no, with Craig Cody, I've just got to introduce him because Craig's a friend. We've been in masterminds together. He's been a client of Interview Valet, and he has got an amazing story that podcast hosts and podcast listeners just love. You see, Craig's a CPA. He's a tax coach. He's a business owner. He's an entrepreneur. And you're like, okay, yeah. But then it gets better than that. So he's been doing that for 15 years. But 17 years before that, he was a New York City police officer. So he's got great insights. And the other thing that I always say is that to me, most accountants that I've ever met seem like they're archaeologists. They always are back looking and documenting the stuff. But I love about Craig is he's always forward looking too. And that helps so much. And real innovator. And he was one of the early ones to use podcast interview marketing to grow his business. So Craig, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm psyched. I'm really psyched.
Well,
always good to talk to you, Tom.
It's fun, and it's like the wonders of podcasting. We get to talk, and the world gets to listen in here. So what did I leave out on that off-the-cuff introduction of my friend Craig?
Oh, God. Nothing much other than that. I co-authored a best-selling Amazon bestseller.
And I had the book in front of me, and I still forgot it. I had to run and get the copy I've got all the highlights in.
And then I have my latest.
Well, we're going to talk about that later because that has been a great giveaway from the podcast interviews.
Have to have a giveaway.
That's right. Well, can you tell us maybe from the beginning here why you started to look at podcast interviews as a way to get your message out there and to gain the attraction of more customers?
It was really kind of, such a weird thing. I was at a conference of people like myself that specialize in tax planning. And one of the girls had talked about she was doing podcasts. And I didn't even know what a podcast was. So we talked and I said, it sounds interesting. Let me give it a shot. Not knowing anything. And started doing some podcasts and I really, I was just really throwing my money away. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no real plan. There was no back end. They told me what I should have done. I was supposed to do, but I was running a business.
Right.
So a couple of months into it, I said, this isn't for me. I can't do this. I got to find a better way. So I stopped doing it and I started doing some research and I found Interview Valet and they were doing exactly what I needed. So they were handling A to Z. Okay, not just A to M. And, if it was up to me to do that M to Z, it wasn't getting done. So and that's I remember calling you up. Okay.
It sounds like when we as business owners call up the accountant and it's like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to be doing all this stuff, but I'm trying to run a business. I'm going to go with somebody that's the expert there. So what was your experience on those first podcasts? Because how long have you been doing it now total?
Now it's been just about 2 years exactly.
Okay.
So the first year was pretty much crickets, until we figured it all out. So I guess I did. It takes a while for them to air and stuff like that. So we started working together about 9 months into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when all of a sudden we had the landing pages and we had all the things that were supposed to happen getting set up. And, the interviews kind of trickle out there. Like it's not you don't just hit the switch and you're going, you get those interviews and, they basically schedule you out there and then you get scheduled and you do the interview, then you wait for it to air. So it wasn't until November that all of a sudden I saw it actually all coming together.
Yeah, because it's like, with 400,000 podcasts, getting on the podcast is not the tough part, right? Because it's like podcasts are like doctor's offices or restaurants. If there's not a line there, you probably don't want to be there. So getting on the right ones there. And the other thing is your content, your stories are so great. So you had the fuel there from the podcast interviews. You just needed the engine to put it into to really get the results. Were there Were there any surprises that you had early on with your podcast interviews?
Yeah, there was one, and actually, I give him a lot of credit. He stopped me. I won't mention his name, but I'm very appreciative. He stopped me, and he says, "We're going to start over. You need to give more information out," because I was used to giving the interview the way, like if somebody walked into my office, you know, if somebody walks into the office and you tell them everything, they're going to walk out, and you're never going to, it's over. You'll never see them again. So that's kind of the mentality I had. And then he's like, no, you have to give people content, give them the information. He says, the ones that want to work with you and that you want to work with you, they'll come back. And right away, it made a huge difference.
And that's sort of a mindset shift, because a lot of people think, well, if I give my best stuff on the interview, well, then why would they ever work with me? But it's that give mentality.
And I've kind of come to learn, and I've changed and everything, that, you know what, the people that are going to take your stuff and do it anyway, you don't want to work with them anyway. There's how many million people in the United States, so this next, and just, the people that you want to work with are the people that want to come back and work with you and value the insight that you have.
And that's the thing, is you're talking to so many millions of people that you don't need to convert all of them. It's just there are certain people that resonate with you, and it's like, man, Craig, I love his heart, love his story. He's the one I want to work with. So those offers that you talked about, what kinds of things were you talking about on the podcast that engaged them? And then what kind of offers did you use in order to move them from being a passive listener to an active visitor to your website?
So the offers I was talking about were really strategies, tax saving strategies, how to, they all revolved around being proactive and communicating with your accountant or CPA. So that's what, I was talking about, and I could get into that if you want. And then the offer or giveaway was a copy of my free book. And we set up, you guys set up the landing page, and there's an opt-in that links into Infusionsoft, and they put their information in, and we get the email, and my personal assistant would put everything together and get it out in the mail. And in the beginning, there was a battle in this office over here, because I wanted them out that day, and I lost that battle, like most of them. And now we send them out. They usually go out every Thursday.
Well, I loved how when you talk about things, you're a different type of accountant that I've run into, right? Because you just don't focus on the accounting. You focus on what does it mean. I think of the old joke somebody gave me, a compliment. They said, "You're just like Preparation H," and I'm like, that's a compliment? Yeah, you take away the pain, you're recommended all the rest of that, because nobody, well, I was going to say business owners. As a business owner myself, I don't know that I would want to listen to a podcast where all they were talking about is accounting. So you focused on the pains they had and what they really wanted, which was to save money. Right. Did that resonate really well?
I think it does. It's all, we talk about important to communicate, and, by doing that, you'll keep more of what you make. So it's kind of from a client standpoint is, hey, we want to pay our legal share of taxes, but we shouldn't be paying more than our legal share of taxes. If Buffett and Trump and Gates and everybody could have a team of lawyers and accountants so they pay the legal limit, why can't we all do that? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we talk about, and that's the philosophy, and it all kinds of comes down to communicating. I tell people, the doctor doesn't call you up and say, are you sick today? You call the doctor. You need to communicate with your accountant.
And that's a great contrast there, where you said, like, this is what you need to do. So even if they didn't engage you, they still got value out of it. But you also put the contrast of, this is how we work with our clients. So if they could see, well, I've been working with my professional for a long time, and that's not how we work. That sounds like a better way. That contrast works really well. And talk about like some of the examples that you would use too, because content's king, but context is really the god.
And when you say examples, meaning strategy example? Strategies,
or how would you change what you talked about, say, based on the audience? If it was entrepreneurs as opposed to, like if it was professionals like, say, dentist or something, as opposed to somebody that was running an Amazon business?
So I try and tailor the strategies to those strategies that work for that industry, and it doesn't always work because, and originally I thought, I don't want to be on a personal finance type of podcast because, you know, I deal with business owners, I can't really help it, and what I realize is there's a ton of business owners on those personal finance. And I've also learned that just because it's a big show doesn't mean you're going to get a lot of people, opting in and stuff like that. Some of the shows that aren't those huge names, you'll get a tremendous amount. So and that's the reason why we'll talk about later. It's important to track the different statistics.
I can remember that show you talked about where they gave you the feedback. I can also remember the show where you came back to Cindy and said, "Are you serious? Why would I go on this show?" And she was like, "Trust me, this is a good one." And after that, I think you and Cindy bonded a whole lot better after the results from that one.
And I learned my lesson.
Well, and I think, I'll speak from my personal experience, is that the ego thing there is like, I want to get on a big podcast, and there's more fish in the ocean. But man, if you could find a barrel of fish, go there every time. And
right.
Podcasts are so niche down, you know exactly who you're talking to.
Exactly.
Now, you were talking about tracking your results, and I know you use Infusionsoft, so you've got the abilities there, but being a great accountant, you track everything too. So can you talk a little bit about how you track that and what you saw out of that?
Sure. So we use Infusionsoft. So everything, all the opt-ins are tied into Infusionsoft. And since we do a separate landing page for each podcast, I don't have them automatically tagged per podcast. So I go back into Infusionsoft every day, every couple of days, and I go through all the opt-ins and I tag them to see which podcast they came from.
Based on the welcome page they hit.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's I track there. Then I go in and what I consider a lead. So I consider that an opt-in. They wanted our book. Then I track leads, and that's when people have actually contacted our office. All right, and they want to talk to me. So I track those, and I track them by what podcast they came from, and then I go through that, and I say, okay, well, I might have gotten 100 opt-ins from this type of podcast, and that turned into 50 leads, but it only turned into one sale, and that's because most of those people aren't really qualified prospects. Mm-hmm. And then whereas I might do a different type of podcast, and I might only get 15 opt-ins, but 5 of them will turn into leads, and they're all qualified prospects. So then what we would do is we'd research and put together a list and then send that to you guys, and you guys would look to book us on that type of podcast. So at the same time, though, looking at other podcasts, not just focusing on one niche, in lieu of everything else, because you don't know what the next area is going to be.
Right. And I love how you break that out, because a lot of people will say an opt-in is the same thing as a lead. And at that point, it sort of becomes a vanity metric. I gave away an iPad, and I got 1,000 leads. No, you got 1,000 opt-ins for an iPad. Doesn't mean they were good qualified customers. So when you start talking about your cost of lead acquisition, those are really sales qualified leads. They're not just somebody gave you an email address.
Right, and we break it down by the cost per opt-in, the cost per lead, and the cost per sale. Because like you said, you might get a lot of opt-ins, and they may really just be that, or you may get a lot of leads and they're not qualified. But we want the qualified leads. That's what's going to drive everything. So we want to be able to figure that out.
And I love how you're attributing where all the leads and sales are coming from too, because while we put as much science on it as we can, some of this is art. And sometimes you hit a base hit and you're like trying to figure out why was that? But when you can attribute it and say, wow, we got a home run from that one, so how can we find more like that? Or the same way, if they loved you once and it was a home run, what can we do to get on there again in order to have a conversation with them?
Yeah. And obviously, you don't just appear on these shows and they don't just show up on, in iTunes. It's a process, So, like we're recording this in November. So, you know, you could record something today that won't hit until February or even later. So,
Yeah, and you came to that realization. It took me a while when I first started out because we'd say something like we'd mention Thanksgiving, or I would mention Thanksgiving on the podcast. Well, it may not come out till St. Patrick's Day, and all of
right.
a sudden that sounds really dated. And even though we're recording this in 2017, I guarantee you there's somebody in 2020 that's listened to it for the first time and going, "Oh, this is great."
Well, that's what's so amazing is, I get opt-ins now or leads, whatever you want to call them, from way back, like, over a year ago. So it's really like, okay, it's evergreen, as they say, you know.
So with that, do you try to make your content more evergreen too? Are you talking in general principles as opposed to, hey, here's the tax change for this year, so it's more applicable than?
Well, because typically there's not a whole lot of major change in the tax laws. I talk as if that's the way it is. So obviously, if there was a major change after a podcast went on and somebody contacted us, we would discuss that. I don't see major change happening,
So
but
look at it this
um,
way: if they abolish the IRS, now you can go back on all those podcasts again and talk about what it means to them.
right, right. But I
But
think in general, it is kind of evergreen content. Yeah.
because you're talking big picture stuff to business owners, not tax accounting to other accountants.
Exactly, and what works this year is going to work next year, the year after, and so on.
Excellent. And so you had talked before about your results, and I love this because when you shared it with me the first time, I had to go through the numbers again. And I'm like, am I understanding his math correctly? Because most of the time I've seen like cost of lead acquisition numbers, cost of customer acquisition numbers from software as a service companies, and I know those are proprietary things, but that you even tracked those. But when you started to track things like return on investment, wow, that is pretty advanced. So you can tell why you're marketing, what's working, and what the next channel has to beat in order to beat podcast interviews here.
Right. So the ROI comes from when we actually work with a client and we do a tax plan for them. We show them their first year ROI. So it all come out of that. So I figured, let's see what the ROI is here. Let's see what it's costing us. Okay, let's see what the revenue is. Let's and then total revenue in the first year. And so we came up with it's crazy. It's it was like almost 900% first year ROI. So, and it's been fairly consistent. It's not like we just went through the roof one month. I think the first time we tracked it, we were at around 700, and that was great. And then it stayed around there, and it slowly started to creep up. So
that was interesting because the first time you showed me the numbers, I think was just after Podcast Movement, and I was blown away that it was like near 700% ROI. And then you just showed it to me before here, and it's 900% ROI. Do you think what's causing that? But besides the talent of the podcast guest.
Well, what I think, thank you. What I think is happening, and because I look at our leads, and the leads have been growing month to month, So I think that and I'm hearing from people, I heard you on multiple podcasts. They didn't just hear me on one; they heard me on a couple. And sometimes we had a client where they contacted us back in April, okay, and they were a lead at that point, and we just couldn't get in touch with them. And finally, in September, they contacted us again, and but we heard you on another podcast, and we knew we need to, So the more that's out there, it just kind of exponentially grows because, we started with 4 or 5 leads per month, and the first couple months it was like that, and then it started to grow a little bit, and then all of a sudden, when I thought the summer was going to come and it would slow down, it started to balloon, and it's been growing ever since. So, um,
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see what the next few months are, to see how it progresses.
Because how many interviews have you done up to this point now?
I've probably done about 50,
Okay. And
figure
so,
4 a month roughly, for the most part, you know, they've aired by now,
right.
so roughly in that ballpark.
And if you think about it, yeah. So, and how they build on each other with evergreen content. That you've got 50 podcasts that are sending you leads, sending you backlinks for the SEO and everything like that.
And I've talked to people where they've told me that, let's just say they were a medical doctor, and they were interested when they heard me on a medical doctor, but then they heard me on a real estate podcast. So they said, okay, well, he's not only knows about, medical stuff, but he also knows about real estate taxes. So,
Interesting.
and they'd call me, and which is, to me, I was like, wow, and it wasn't, and it wasn't like they were Googling Craig Cody to see what podcast he was on. They just happened to listen to, and they heard me on different podcasts.
It gives you a whole lot of extra credibility with that then.
Right. And I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but when I check my Google stuff, and like, a large percentage of stuff is people Googling my name. It's not like they're Googling tax planning and they're finding us. They've heard us somewhere, and that's the podcast.
From the name recognition there. So
Right.
that's got to help. That's got to help the SEO too. If people keep Googling your name, that's going to
And
start coming up higher, and all those backlinks from the podcast.
Well, the
too.
backlinks are another whole thing. I haven't even figured that whole thing out, how that all works.
Yeah, and it's like I have no idea how to quantify that on return on investment, but that's got to have some value long term to the overall value.
I definitely haven't figured it out, but it's got to have some value in there. So it's but it's interesting. It's really interesting.
So what would you tell somebody that was in a similar industry to you, not a competitor, but in a similar industry, if they were thinking about trying to use podcast interviews to get their message out there, to get in front of their ideal customers?
Definitely do it. It's going to take some time. It's well worth it, and it's not just the front end; it's the back end. You have to have the whole thing down. And that's where you come in, because you guys handle that whole thing.
Let you be the guest, and we take care of the rest. And
that's right.
I always say that's not my good copy. That came from a client, because tell you what, I could not do what you do. What's ordinary to you is amazing to me. And I always listen to podcasts to give people feedback on them. But yours, I also listen to get tax tips. And it's like, yeah. Usually about once a quarter, I listen to one as I'm writing a check. It's like, yeah, I need to listen to Craig some more.
Well, that's like, I like to be able to call, and we've had a number of calls over the last, year and a half where, we'll just kind of go over strategy, and, this way I can give you feedback, what's going on, what's working, what's not working, so I think that's important for both of us,
Yeah, because early on, it's a lot of qualitative. It's like this is how it felt on the podcast. But then after a while, you get the quantitative with the numbers to support that, and really to focus in more and more.
Right. And I think early on, at least me, I didn't have the confidence of like, am I doing this right? And, now I just feel much more comfortable when I'm doing it. I've done so many of them, I could, I like to do my prep and listen to a couple of their podcasts and stuff like that. But, I've done it. I'm real comfortable doing it now.
So at what point, like, were you nervous on the first ones? Because people ask me that, like, when did the nerves go away? And I'm like, I can't remember. There's some podcasts that I'll still get nervous on. And I'll be honest, I am more nervous being the host of this than I've been being a guest for a long, long time. But where was that difference for you? Like when you felt like, man, I'm getting the knack of this, and then when you felt like I've really got control of this?
I think when the nervousness probably went away when I started getting people just opting in, and then I kind of figured out, okay, I'm doing something right. People are actually they want the book, and then I was obviously much more comfortable, and the more comfortable I was, it was kind of just like a cycle. And then, more opt-ins are coming in, and I'm getting, okay, I definitely know what I'm doing. And you know what you're talking about, but it's different when you're being interviewed.
Yeah. Is it resonating?
Yes. Yes. So, am I talking like the guy with the pocket protector, or am I talking like somebody that, wants to give out good information? So.
Well, it definitely proves that what you're saying is resonating to the right audiences, and you've got the numbers to back it up. So, Craig, thank you so much for sharing your experience here. What's ordinary to you is amazing to all the rest of us. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the services that you can help them with also?
It's our website is www.craigcodyandcompany.com. And I guess we should put up a landing page.
Let's
how about /interview valet?
That sounds great. We'll do that.
And our phone number here is 516-869-4051.
And like you said, a lot of people are just thinking, if they can't remember craigcodyandcompany.com /interview valet, what they're going to do is they're going to go, Craig Cody. Yeah, Craig Cody CPA. I'll just Google that. Either way, you're going to find a great accountant, a great man of character there, a guy that understands how businesses run, how entrepreneurs think. And I love his mission there to help us keep more of what we earn and do it legally. So thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.